Many of you may remember Burger Chef. It was a fast food restaurant that began its Indianapolis operation in 1954. It soon became a chain that spread across the country, with over 1,000 locations. The chain was eventually purchased by the owners of Hardee's in 1982. The last location closed in 1996. Now that you have the background, let's dive into our case. At midnight, on November 17, 1978, an unnamed employee entered the Speedway Burger Chef to find the restaurant abandoned. The rear door, that was always locked, was left open, the registers were empty, and the 4 employees, who were scheduled to be at work, were missing. The 4 missing employees included 20-year-old assistant manager, Jane Freet, 17-year-old, Ruth Ellen Shelton, and Daniel Davis, and Mark Flemons, who were both only 16. November 17th had been an ordinary Friday evening. The 4 staff members had closed up the store for the night, at 11 p.m. This was the last time they were confirmed to be in the store. Speedway police arrived on the scene the following Saturday morning, November 18th. Their initial findings were the safe and rear door were open, and all of the cash had been removed. The total amount stolen was $581. Although this was not a small amount of money in 1978, it was still considered to be petty theft, and was not enough for police to make a major investigation of. Investigators initially believed the robbery to be an inside job. 2 empty currency bags, a used roll of tape, and the previous night's coins were left behind. Because there was no attempt to clean the scene, and there did not appear to be any signs of a struggle, police believed the 4 employees had simply taken the money and left to go party. Here is where things start to get weird. The 2 female staff members failed to take their purses, and the other employees left their jackets behind. It is unusual for women to go anywhere without their purse, and they surely do not leave them at work for someone to rifle through and steal the contents. This was a November night in Indiana, so the temperatures were not exactly freezing, but it was too cold to simply leave their jackets behind. Even after these findings, police dismissed the left-behind belongings as items that were simply forgotten, citing no sign of a struggle as the reason for their dismissal. The police left the scene without conducting any real investigation, and expected the 4 employees would turn up later. Investigators failed to take any crime scene photos or fingerprints before giving the manager permission to clean and reopen the store. As that Saturday dragged on, the employees' families became increasingly worried. If they had taken the cash and gone out to party, wouldn't they be home by now to sleep the previous night's activities off? Even as Speedway authorities continued to receive calls from the families, the worried callers were met with little concern. It was not until Jane Freet's white Chevy Vega suddenly appeared parked in the middle of town that police took any real interest in the case. The driver's side door was locked, but the passenger side door was left unlocked. Of course, Freet was still nowhere to be found at this point, and no evidence was found in the vehicle that indicated foul play or gave any clues to where the 4 missing individuals might be. Police finally began to consider the idea that the 4 employees had been abducted during the robbery. This was when the case transitioned from a petty theft investigation to a kidnapping case. November 17th had been a gloomy but ordinary Friday evening. The doors were locked on time, at 11 p.m. while the employees carried out their closing duties, which were in place to prepare the restaurant to reopen the next morning. Daniel Davis had changed out of his uniform shirt, while Jane took the cash from the register drawers and placed it in the safe, located in the manager's office. This was the last time they were confirmed to be in the store. Normally all of their duties would be completed around midnight. Another employee, who hadn't been scheduled to work that evening, stopped by to apparently meet up with one of the 4. He had arrived at midnight, where he found the back door unlocked and ajar, the safe open, and the restaurant empty. He immediately contacted the Speedway Police Department. Jane was the assistant manager at only 20 years old, was the oldest member of the staff that night. She had been an employee of Burger Chef for 3 years, and had been at the Crawfordsville Road location since the spring of 1978. While professional, She was known to have a wild sense of humor, and always had a smile on her face. Ruth was 17, and an honor student, at Northwest High School. She had hoped her heavy workload would guarantee her acceptance into a good college, where she planned to study computer science. She was also a very active member of her church. Mark, who was 16 years old, was the youngest child of 7 children, and a student at Speedway High School. He had struggled with his schooling, but by the fall of 1978, he had made major improvements. Due to his recent improvements, and the within walking distance location, Mark's father had agreed to allow him to start work at Burger Chef. Danny, who was also 16 years old, was a student at Decatur Central High School. He was known for his ability to make others laugh, and for his love of photography. He was fascinated by aviation, and had planned to enlist in the Air Force after graduation. Friday, November 17, 1978, was his first Friday night shift. The 4 employees had never even been late for a shift, so they were considered to be responsible, and were well trusted by management. On Sunday, November 19, 1978, authorities were alerted that bodies had been found by a couple who had been walking through the woods, 20 miles away from the location of Burger Chef. Authorities arrived at an isolated wooded area to find the bodies of the 4 missing employees, still dressed in their work uniforms. Ruth Ellen Shelton and Dan Davis were found with gunshot wounds to the backs of their heads in an execution-style murder. Jane Freet had been stabbed twice in the chest. The stabs were so forceful that the knife's handle had broken off, leaving the blade in her chest. Mark Flemons had asphyxiated on his own blood, due to being left on his back, after suffering major blunt force trauma to the head. Although it has not been confirmed, there are 2 suspected causes of Flemons' death. The first suspected cause of death is a chain was used to cause the blunt force trauma. The second is, Flemons might have been knocked unconscious and rolled down a hill, where he asphyxiated, after he attempted to run, and subsequently ran headfirst into a tree. This claim was made due to the downhill location of Flemons' body. It is believed that Flemons may have survived the beating, had he not been left on his back. The victims were determined to have died sometime on Friday night, or early Saturday morning. The gun, knife handle, and chain were not found at the murder scene. At this point, police are not only without the murder weapons, they are now without any real evidence, due to the poor handling of the initial crime scene at Burger Chef. Police had made an unbelievable mistake when they chose to treat their initial investigation as a petty theft case that they suspected to have been committed by the employees. Almost no investigatory efforts had taken place. Authorities had allowed Burger Chef to reopen the following day, so the initial crime scene was almost immediately tainted and contaminated to a point of no return. Absolutely no evidence was collected, including fingerprints, hair or fibers, or even useful photos. Investigators began to notice some oddities in the photos, such as the time of day, and the differing in the placement of specific objects. Speedway police were then forced to admit they had completely staged the photos after their initial failure to capture any. Police had returned to the Burger Chef at a later date to attempt to recreate the scene from memory, as if it was the night of the crime, so photos could be taken in an attempt to hide their botched investigation. They had replaced the previously collected currency bags and tape before conducting their highly unethical cover-up. Outside of what they had attempted to fake, investigators were left with no physical evidence. In the following September, the investigation was further complicated when Speedway residents were rocked once again by a series of bombings in the area. The bombings were carried out with the use of small explosives that were made using pop cans. In total there were 8 explosions. Most of the explosions did not harm anyone, but the final explosion injured Carl DeLong, a veteran of the Vietnam War. DeLong lost his leg as a result of his injuries. The explosions were initially believed to be connected to the Burger Chef murders, but this has since been ruled out. Another crime that was suspected to have been connected to the murders was the murder of 65-year-old Julia Cyphers. She was murdered in her garage by a still unknown perpetrator. This case has also been found to have no connection to the murders. The bombings were found to have been carried out by a local musician who authorities believe was using the bombings to distract authorities from the Julia Cyphers murder. It is suspected that Cyphers was murdered by Kimberlin because she had accused him of having inappropriate relations with her underage granddaughter. Her murder remains unsolved. So here we are, 40 years later. What do we know now? Police have testimony from an unnamed eyewitness, who claims there were two suspicious men in a car outside of the restaurant on the evening of the murders. The men were both Caucasians, looked to be in their 30s, and one had light-colored hair, and the other had a beard. Authorities still have the 4.5-inch blade of the knife that broke off in the chest of Freet. The handle of the knife was never located. Veteran State Trooper Bill Dalton has now been assigned to the Burger Chef case, following the retirement of Detective William Stoney Vaughn, who had been assigned the case since 1998. Vaughn believed he had solved the case, but he was unable to prove his suspicions. Dalton now focuses on the knife, which he states would have to have been kept in a leather sheath and worn on a belt. In the time of the murders, the disco era, wearing a knife on your belt was a common accessory. Although it has been stated that wearing a knife on your belt was common in the 70s, Dalton has stated, "I'm hoping someone will remember a person who back in the day wore a knife on his belt," Dalton said. "I'm hoping this will generate some tips." There have been a surplus of dead-end tips over the years, and hundreds of individuals have been interviewed. The case notes are said to fill more than 2 dozen, thick 3-ring binders. Police are scanning all of the case information and notes into a computer program that they hope will make connections and notice patterns that were missed by human minds. Maybe the use of technology will bring us closer to solving this case and bring some much-needed closure to the families of the victims. There are many unconfirmed theories surrounding this case. I will cover them, but keep in mind, these are simply theories. The first theory began in 1984, when Detective Mel Wilsey, of the Marion County Sheriff's Department, received a call from an inmate, who was currently incarcerated, at the Pendleton Correctional Facility. The caller was Donald Forrester, an inmate serving a 95-year sentence for rape. Forrester said he was involved in the murders, and was willing to provide a confession. In exchange he asked that his impending transfer to Indiana State Prison be halted. At first, the call seemed to hold a promising lead, as Forrester was a career criminal, with a history of violent behavior, who was, in fact, living in Speedway at the time of the murders. Detectives quickly received a court order to bring Forrester to Marion County, where he confessed to shooting Davis and Shelton. He took police to the crime scene in the woods, and provided an accurate description of the location and position of the bodies. Forrester's confession stated that Freet's brother, James, owed money on a drug deal, which prompted himself and 3 associates to visit the Burger Chef to threaten her. When Flemons intervened, in an attempt to protect Freet, a fight had broken out, which ended in Flemons receiving a major head injury when he fell and hit his head on the bumper of a car. The 4 perpetrators believed Flemons was dead or dying, so the robbery and abduction were carried out to ensure there were no witnesses. Forrester went on to say he had shot Davis and Shelton, and provided the names of the 3 men, who he claimed were responsible for the murders of Flemons and Freet. Forrester claimed he had tossed the gun into a river, but no weapon was ever retrieved. When Forrester's ex-wife was interviewed, she stated that days after the murders, she had driven with him out to the wooded area, where she remained in the car, while he retrieved several shell casings from the crime scene. He had then driven home, where he flushed the casings down the toilet. Police then obtained a warrant to search the septic tank of the home. The search successfully recovered several spent .38 caliber casings. When Forrester's cooperation with the police was leaked by a member of the press, he recanted his confession and claimed it was coerced. With no further cooperation from Forrester, and no direct evidence that connected him to the crime, he was never charged. Forrester died in prison from cancer in 2006, at the age of 55. This confession would fit the seemingly personal attack on Freet, where she was stabbed with such force that the knife had broken. Another theory is that the robbery and murders were gang-related. The final theory is that it was simply a robbery that had gone wrong. This theory states that the employees may have accidentally been allowed to view the faces of the robbers, or that Mark Flemons, who was covering a shift for another employee, might have recognized them. However, in my mind, if this were the case, why wouldn't the perpetrators have taken precautions, and simply worn masks, to prevent possible identification? Despite thousands of hours of police work, and a $25,000 reward, offered by Burger Chef, to anyone who could provide information, or help lead police to the murderers, the case remains unsolved. Indiana State Police continue to hold the case open. Unfortunately, this case may never be solved, due to the failures of the initial investigation. In my opinion, this case has already been solved, but what you know, and what you can prove, are two completely different things. Had the case been investigated properly from the beginning, I believe Donald Forrester's story could have easily been substantiated with forensic evidence. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe to our channel.